You're taking great care of this airplane. It looks just like it did when I flew it. It really does. You're really taking good care of it. You know, it's kind of dirty, but that's the way they were. I mean, you got rid of a lot of the soot that was coming down the side just because. But you know what? It's just going to sound stupid, but you get in it and it's the smell. It's the smell. When you get in there and all the fluids and everything, it's just the way that thing smells when you get in it. They all smell the same. It's like, yeah, I'm home.
What motivated you to join the Air Force?
Wow, that's a hard story. I went to the University of Maryland. I was able to get a ride in the 1st Helicopter Squadron, Hueys. And they took us on in Washington, they have low-level routes. And one of the routes, you go down over through the middle of the cherry blossoms, through the tidal basin, around the Lincoln Memorial, up through right next to Watergate, and up the Rock Creek River. And I was in the back. I was just a knucklehead, student. I'm like, this is cool. I am flying down here at 100 feet. I'm doing this. So that's what started it. I ended up getting a station back at the 1st Heli early in my career. So I actually, I flew there. Those blue and white helicopters, yeah. My dad and my uncle both did their 4 years. Both were stationed here at Wright-Patterson. I was born here at Wright-Patterson, but I grew up in Rockville, Maryland, just outside of DC, and spent my whole life there. And then once I got out of college and went into the military, I never went back. My mom's still pissed off about that. She wanted me to come back home. I'm like, no. I married a Texas gal, and I live in Texas, so that's it.
You went the ROTC route then?
Right. 4-year ROTC at the University of Maryland. There was this program called FIP, Flight Instruction Program. So while I was in college, I got my fixed wing. And so I had my stiff wing. And then when I was in college going through that, that's when I got turned on to helicopters. And then I had to compete because there was only one slot. I had my pilot slot. I was going to go to pilot training, but I had to compete for helicopter. And my PO, I can't remember, his name was Colonel Noble. He said, we got one helicopter slot, and there was like 20 guys. We all wanted for it, and I got it. And he's like, you sure about this? These things are, he was an old stiff wing guy. He's like, these things fly apart. I'm like, no, sir, I want. So yeah, and then that's how it happened, and I went to Fort Rucker right out of college. 357, well, all of it, the 53s, they're just wonderful to fly. 3 hydraulic systems, 6 blades, lots of power, and it's maneuverable as all get out. It is nimble like you wouldn't believe. I don't think I ever had, even loaded, I never had any trouble with the tail rotor, because that's, in a helicopter, you punch that left pedal and it starts sucking the power, and it's bad. This thing, I don't think I've ever had any trouble with a power-related issue until you started pigging it out, for a wartime thing. It's 55,000 pounds, it starts to really go, wow, you start to notice it. But we have wheels, and that's the cool thing that people don't realize about helicopters is I can get on the runway and get this thing moving forward, go through ETL, and it'll just lift off the ground. I really don't have to pull the collector. It just lifts off the ground. And what was this? 4330. Man, you're really hurting me. Shaft horsepower, each jet, 4330, I think. That's
It's a lot of power.
Yeah, that's a lot of shaft horsepower. 2 pilots, 2 gunners, 2 engineers, and when you were a crew, you were a crew. So you didn't really get an airplane. It's like what was flyable at the time. Okay, take that one. But you were a crew, and everyone had their job. Everyone had we brief, and then everyone would bomb burst. Gunners would take care of the guns and the ammos and everything else that having to do with all that. The engineers would come out in pre-flight. Were just flight planning like crazy. I mean, we just had maps and nav logs and just flight checking weather. Just nutty stuff. Every time, and then we'd walk out to the plane, they'd have the APU running, and it would be powered up. It'd be pre-flighted, The engineers would pre-flight it, and then it was to get in. And normally, if you were like the pilot in command, you would sit in the left seat because you'd have to do a lot of radio coordination. I don't know, we didn't talk about the radios, but there's like a ton of radios in this thing. So then the pilot, he would sit in the right seat. He would run the checklist and get the thing running, and that's how you go. And then you just either side, you could fly, you could pave and fly from either side. The only advantage to sitting in one seat or the other I found was during air refueling. So if you were in the right seat, the boom is going right out your door, and you could follow it kind of right up the hose. And if you were on the left side of the 130, easy to plug in. If you were going to hit the right side of the 130, remember the props on the 130s turn like this, so the prop wash goes, so it's a little tougher on the right side of the 130. But if you're in the left seat, you're closer to the 130 and the probe's out here. So you're actually closer, and you're inside, you know, because you're actually very close to the 130. So it's a different sight picture. That's really the only difference between the seats. But otherwise, you know, navving, terrain following, all that stuff, it was same. It didn't matter what seat you were on. There's a joystick on the side of the seat, and we could, hover coupler is what that's called. So you could switch over to the hover coupler, let go of the cyclic, move your hand to the joystick, and very small increments move that airplane around. So that was when you had to really precisely hover, like over a ship or a roof or somewhere, and you wanted to just barely, you could do that.
You're like feathering it.
Right, you could just barely move, and it would just move that, it would just move it around. And then it's like, okay, time to go. Let go, hit the button, and fly out. So yeah, Kosovo, it was, you know, that was a sad time. It was a lot of, that whole ethnic cleansing thing was a tough deal. We had good stories, and it's a training story to begin with. We had something that was called the Gauntlet over there, and it was like sheer cliffs, and this thing, TFTA radar, and we never really, in Florida, we only had the Banana Ridge is where we used to go and TF on one side and TF down the other and go, okay, we're qualified, you know, I'm good for another 45 days. In Bosnia, they had this sheer cliff canyon called the Gauntlet, and boy, you could TF two-sided TF, and it was great training. It was really great training, but once you were in there, the bad guys were looking down on you. So we're always kind of, I was always kind of wondering about that. The gunners were always like, I had, Diz Chambliss was his name as the gunner. He was on the tail, took a artillery round through the tail, through the, well, they would all sit on Kevlar. You didn't have the Kevlar blankets in there. They all had Kevlar blankets that would drape. I think it was Diz. He got hit the blanket. It hit him and knocked him up against the, I think it was him, but that, you know, it's that kind of weird stuff. It was just like one-off stuff that would happen in Bosnia. And we had a couple of Purple Heart guys from Bosnia, took some shrapnel inside, and it bounced around because it's armored. You can't see it, but all underneath the engines is titanium. You know, there's titanium all in the cockpit. I mean, there's armor all over this thing, but it would bounce around inside there. That would be, yeah, that was an interesting thing.
And you also took part in Desert Storm as well?
That was just a little, I was training. I got to the unit just as it was wrapping up, but I did go over there through like provide comfort, deny flight from Turkey. Yeah, good stories from Turkey. I spent a lot of time in Turkey because there we could do, again, we ended up flying in the daytime, resupplying the Kurds, who are a bunch of people that just live on little paths on the side of these mountains. It's incredible how they live. And then we would come back, and then the Turks, they would shut the flying, and then the Turks would go and harass them. Because we'd take them stuff in the day, and then the Turks would, harassing is a very broad term, but the Turks would go harass them afterwards. I mean, it was just, they were a terrible people. And back over there, you kind of didn't know where the line from Turkey and Syria and Iraq and all, you know, that whole area there is just kind of lawless. One pave, I don't know, there's pretty famous pictures of pave flying and has struts coming down. That's an old B model, and they couldn't convert it like this because the sponson wasn't beefed up enough. So it has these struts that go out, because when he hung those big tanks on it, it couldn't take the weight. So there was one training bird that had struts on it. I think the tail number was 3-3. And that was like a famous training bird. Oh yeah, I flew the one with the struts. I was like, okay. I felt very lucky to do it. I was glad I did. I wouldn't trade it. I'd do it all again. There were a couple different things that I would do differently now that I have gone through, just like anybody else. They're not regrets. They're just, I should have done it this way. But the very early assignments in the Air Force is really which starts your trajectory. So if you don't know what to do when you get in the Air Force, you got to try and do as much as you can. I was lucky I knew what I wanted to do, and that set my trajectory. But that's the good thing about the military. Man, it is just wide open, it's vast. You can just do anything that your heart desires. And it doesn't have to do with flying. I mean, you know, the Air Force is highly technical. So if you're a technical guy, I have a niece, she's an intel officer. She's stationed at Buckley right now, and she's trying to figure out what she's gonna do. And she's a Chinese speaker, you know. And she got a scholarship. The Air Force paid her to go to school to get a degree in Chinese. Come on. I mean, that was such a good deal. Full ride. And now she's an intel guy. You know, any military career, if you don't have a path, you can go in at the very beginning of your military career, you can find a path. So my advice would be, it doesn't really matter. If you want to join the military and serve, that is one issue. So you've decided to do that, you pick the branch, you serve. But once you get in and start doing it, whack, that's where everything opens up to you, and you can just, you know, pretty much do about anything you want. Because I retired, got out, and I built my own helicopter.
Nice. Yeah,
And I got it back home, and it's the first one in the United States, the first one powered by a Corvette LS7 engine. So I've got a 4-seat helicopter. It's called a Hummingbird. It's got a Bell Jet Ranger nose on it, and then I got a V8 in the back. And that guy that's with me, he's got one too. That's why we're buddies. So he's got one and I've got one. And yeah, so even though I retired, I still fly. I've got my own helicopter. And yeah, now I'm a CFI in it. I'm the only guy in the United States qualified to teach in that helicopter. It's experimental, of course. So I do all my own maintenance, but Cleon's much better at it than I am. Wheels, I like wheels. Skids are for kids, I like wheels. My helicopter has wheels. That's one of the things that turned me on to it. And I'm a Sikorsky fan, and the one that I built is based on a S-52 helicopter, which is a Sikorsky like built in the 50s. But you know, it's my little thing. I call it the Mistress.